From I Am Interchange, this is the Hatch podcast series. It is from the past that we are offered a glimpse of the future. And so it is with Co-Palace in Switzerland. In 1942, with all of Europe mired in World War II, Swiss diplomat Philippe Motu wrote, "If Switzerland is spared by the war, our task will be to make available for moral rearmament, a place where Europeans torn apart by hatred, suffering, and resentment can come together. Co is the place." When the opportunity to purchase the Co-Palace Hotel arose in 1946, Motu and Robert Handlüser, with the financial and physical help of hundreds of fellow Swiss citizens, realized his intentions. The first conferences graced the palace's grounds that summer, and the Co-Foundation, now Initiatives of Change, was founded that fall. The nonprofit foundation has utilized the space as an international center for reconciliation, dialogue, capacity building, and hope ever since. At the close of June 2023, thought leaders, activists, innovators, artists, and disruptors gathered at the palace to collaborate and commune in a Hatch impact co-creation ecosystem. During the 4-day peer-to-peer acceleration, attendees discussed project roadblocks, workshopped barriers to access and evolution, were inspired by speakers, and worked to develop achievable solutions capable of global impact. I'm Tate Chamberlin, and in this podcast, I host internationally acclaimed musician Teneia and Rabbi Joshua Lesser in a discussion about queer community, pride, and the perspective necessary to walk hand in hand through an increasingly hostile political landscape with tenacity and grace. Join us in full color. I was wondering what color of the rainbow you are.
Purple.
Purple.
I'm purple too. Wow.
Ah.
That's not very diverse of us, is it?
No.
What is it about purple?
It's like this I don't know, it's like the spiritual part for me of the queerness.
I'm going to have a t-shirt and spirit is in purple. And for me, it's the spiritual part, but it's also the spirited part, like the activism.
How do each of you identify?
I identify as bisexual, and my pronouns are she and her.
My preferred identity is queer.
Yeah.
And that's been for a very long time. And yet I talk about being gay or having a gay identity. But for me, it's a lot more about the way that I think. I don't particularly present queer, but my thoughts are very queer.
Nice. Yeah, I think I've been leaning into queer a little bit. It was always such a derogatory thing, but then it was a taking away power of people who used it in a derogatory way.
In some ways, it didn't bother me because I was in the early, a little bit older than you. So there was a way that I was very aware of that. And certainly the generation above me was very upset whenever any of us would identify. I came out as part of ACT UP and part of Queer Nation. And I liked that piece. For me, what it was is that it really stood that I'm not part of the status quo, and that I'm here to challenge the status quo. And that I really like. And so some of taking that, like, you think this is a bad word? It's because the status quo needs to be challenged.
What do you remember about coming out?
Oh, my coming out is interesting. So even before I came out, I was 18, and most of my time was spent at gay bars on the weekend with my best friend. And my mom came to me, I think at the time I could have been like 19 or 20, and she was like, "Teneia, are you gay? Because if you are, I'll love you just the same." And at the time, I had no identity to being like, "No, I'm not." And then after that, when I came out, which was a little bit later, I think I was around 24. I had a girlfriend at the time. It was a little bit difficult for my mom for a bit. And my dad's the minister, which is really interesting. And he was the one that was like, "I don't care. Like, I love you just the same." He was really great. So he took on that role and stayed there. But I felt my family is pretty progressive, so I didn't think that there was going to be any issue. I think it was more the disruption for them of what they thought my identity was after the conversation was had. So there was a few years of a struggle within my relationship with my family, because I had a girlfriend for 3.5 years and they were trying to figure the whole thing out, but was really loving towards her. And so that was a part of my coming out story.
I love how you talked about it, Teneia, because I think we have multiple coming outs and the coming out to ourselves. And when I look back at my high school and even elementary school years, I felt like, oh yeah, but I was in pretty much denial because I went to a religious school. And very early on, we got the Leviticus message of this is an abomination. And I was such a good kid and I had such a good outlook that part of when I started coming out, the big wrestling is like, how can I lose this perception? Because now I'm the worst thing that anybody could be when I'm volunteering and really kind and considerate. And so that created a lot. I had a friend my senior year who was a freshman in college. He was an art student. The day after my graduation, I had this like kind of breakthrough at my graduation. When I got my diploma, I got this standing ovation and I didn't expect this. And it like brought me to tears in that moment. And I felt like it was my Sally Fields moment. They really liked me. But I like all of a sudden I was just aware that I was much more well liked than I had realized. And if I had known that, maybe high school would have felt differently. And some of that estrangement was not like knowing that I was different and not having a label for it. And I was sharing this with my friend who then leaned over and kissed me. And then so that's how I came out, like to myself. And it just like unleashed panic and also like this physical exploration because it didn't just stop at a kiss. And so all of a sudden it like awoke something. And then we broke up and I'm like, I'm never doing that again. That was horrible. And I went to tell my best friend, my real best friend from elementary school. And actually, as I went to think about telling him, it was as if a domino pushed. And I'm like, wait, this is the kid who would be like, these aren't purple pants. These are raspberry polos. And so I'm just like, wait, Ori is gay. Like, how did I not put this together? So I was also in denial with him. So I went to tell my best friend that I'm gay. And just for a little color, like I went to his house and he was eating a popsicle and I'm like, we have to talk. And he's about what? And I'm like, about that. And I will bullet point this. We're in the car. I ask him if he's gay. He asks, what if I was? And I was like, you're my best friend. I love you. Of course. So then he like tells me his whole story and he's crying and all of this. And so after he finishes, I said, I have something to tell you. And he looks at me and he says, Josh, I know what you're going to say. And you may not be my most butch friend, but you're certainly the straightest. And so I didn't tell him.
Whoa.
And I was like, okay, maybe I can get through the rest of my life. The thing I want to say is that when I decided to become a rabbi and went to seminary, I was like, I have to come out in every aspect of my life to do this with integrity. And so really at that point, I'd already been an activist and I'd marched on Washington. I was part of ACT UP, but my parents didn't know. And so when I went to tell my parents, they were not thrilled that I was going to be a rabbi in the first place. And then when I told them this, a lot of things happened. But the most profound thing is that my mom looked at me and she said, what are you doing? Are you trying to commit professional suicide? And I like yelled back at her and I'm like, what am I supposed to do now that I'm gay? Be a florist? Am I supposed to cut hair now? Is that what you're telling me? So
that answer alone.
So we struggled, and luckily my parents became huge advocates and activists in their own right. So it does get better.
Yeah. And my parents were the same where they came around. And I think it's like a fear thing for them of their kid being judged or hurt. And even now, I feel like my identity around being bisexual is always challenged because when I came out initially, even my gay friends would say to me, you can't be bisexual. At that time, it was very difficult to even identify as bisexual. You have to be one or the other. And now I love that the spectrum now gives everybody so much freedom. But even coming out as a Mississippian, 20 years ago, that was hard because even my friends were challenging my identity around how I identified.
Do you want to share a little bit about your coming out story, Tate?
Yeah. I feel like it's a never-ending path coming out through an entire lifetime, which is, I think I've shared it with both of you. My coming out, I think in high school, I fell in love with 5 of my straight best friends through high school and college because I was so stubborn, which is the typical gay story. But there's a traumatic thing because they're usually your group of friends who's your best friend, and then you fall in love, and then like my whole friend group in each of those 5 times like fell apart, and which was the family who I would have gone to to digest heartbreak.
Sure.
And so I think it was like early college before I really started coming out. I was on a drive with my friend Eric, and then the dominoes just started falling. I just kept telling people. And then I finally started telling my family, and they were like, we know. But yeah, I mean, we talked about it, I think in Salt Lake, where just gifting myself the gift of never having to come out again and just showing up to a space and being. I don't want it to be a never ending thing. I just want to be and not care at all what other people think of me.
Do you feel like, for you, I'm just curious, why do you feel like you have to come out so often, like constantly? Is it because people think you're straight?
Constantly meeting new people, right? As I travel around and become acquainted with new friends and new collaborators through projects. Yeah, I often wonder if having a lisp, I used to be really afraid that if I ever came out of the closet, I would start talking with a lisp. I wonder if people talk with a lisp so they don't have to come out anymore, so people just know. What do you think of that?
I was just thinking, I think some people just have a speech impediment. Look, I think that we have a lot of cultural ways that we speak. And so sometimes we'll take on a entire kind of language or a stance, because lots of cultures and communities do that as a way to identify and create a sense of community. So I think that either learned or as a way to fit in, that people will take on beyond the list, but we'll take on mannerisms and we'll take on a whole set of insider language and behaviors and mannerisms to identify. I don't think it's to show other people, but I think it's really more of an in thing. Yeah.
Do you have a most memorable moment of your queer life?
Having been a very identified queer activist in my city, my state, and in the US in different ways, there's been so many different things, and even though like I was never someone who thought that marriage equality was the thing that we should be fighting for, to me, I'm much more interested in people's subsistence. And as someone who does weddings, and I love weddings and all of that, I felt like this was a little bit more mainstream privileged. But there was a rally that we had, and people came to the Center for Civil and Human Rights in Atlanta to celebrate. And I had the opportunity to speak to the crowd. And it was just such a jubilant moment that like our rights had moved to the forefront of the country. And I think it goes back to, I had this profound moment where I did the March on Washington in 1993, fighting for a lot of these rights and recognition. And actually why I came out, one of the reasons why I knew I needed to come out to my parents is that I was at a ACT UP. ACT UP is the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. We were at a protest in a correlation with the March on Washington at a pharmaceutical company, because of the overpricing and the ways that they were taking advantage of people who were dying. And for whatever reason, CNN like focused on me as the activist, like walking through with whatever my sign was. So that later on that evening, people recognized, you were on TV. And I was like, shit, like my parents watch CNN. This would be the worst way for them to, not maybe the worst. There are worse ways. I just had the whole kind of movie reel of a bunch of worse ways. But to have my parents see me on television is not the kind of intimacy or honor that the family, but there was something really powerful, both being at that march and being and then celebrating like the whole kind of arc of fighting and demanding rights, and then seeing that some things can change. To me is this like powerful queer moment.
And mine is really simple, but a few years ago, Mississippi has a big pride celebration, and my whole family came, including my grandma, who was like 80, I think she was 84, 85 at the time. And to me, to move from a point of having my family feel like it was a disruption, my mom, or to having them on board and being there and being supportive and being in the audience and having fun. I think that to me is like one of those moments where people can learn and grow. And so it was a part of my journey that I had to go through that forced them to grow and be more open-minded. And they were just so awesome and loving. And I just think if I can be anything in the family, it's that. This person that pushes for change and open their eyes in a way. And that was a moment that I can remember that was a reflection for me that I felt like I was really proud of.
When you were young and you had a perception of the queer community versus when you're old, were there any distinct differences of how you thought about the community between your younger self and your current self?
I had so much fun. And honestly, my first paid gig was at a gay club. So for me, it was this whole thing around just being a part of a culture that celebrated having fun and being your authentic self. And that was every weekend of my life. I was a huge party kid and I loved going out dancing. And I just remember like learning so much every weekend that I would go and hang out and just seeing people love on each other and not be afraid to express themselves. I think that was the biggest eye-opening thing for me as like an 18-year-old because I hadn't fully seen that.
That's a hard question for me because I think, first of all, there was this like very effeminate and like a particular dramatic kind of vision of the gay community that was presented to me. And it wasn't a full there wasn't a full sense of people's self-expression. It was really on one end of the spectrum. And when I was at Northwestern and I went to the gay and lesbian, whatever club, that's what I also encountered. So I encountered some folks that were really catty and did this whole banter that I actually also learned eventually, but it didn't feel like me. And I would go to gay clubs. And so I lived in this confusion of, I felt really emotionally attracted to women and physically attracted to men. And it just put me in this really confused state. And when I would go out to gay bars, people thought that I was straight. And that was really upsetting to me as well. I think that when I started coming out more, I fell myself into groove, and that actually the queer community in a lot of ways, even though I've never really presented countercultural looking, I really found a home in a way where people were making distinctions, even within the gay community, saying, we can live our lives this way, or we can do it that way. Because I've also felt like the other gay community that now I want to embrace all of it, but there were lots of ways where I encountered gay men who wanted to actually just be heteronormative. And I think I was judgmental of that. I think I had a lot of judgments that I had to get through in order to be at a place where the more I can accept myself, the more spaciousness I can give to other people's choices. And I think that actually expanded my thought about drag. And today I'm a fierce trans activist, and that feels really important. But I think I would have distanced myself from drag and trans folks because of the stereotypes of the community that I was going into that felt really foreign to me.
Yeah. Yeah. What about stereotypes? Like the good stereotypes and the bad ones?
Around my like sexual identity?
Yeah, just like the stereotype of, I know it's true, but how great of style we have.
Or bisexuals can't choose.
Bisexuals are really greedy.
Greedy. They just want to have sex with everybody.
Is that true today?
No comment. Yeah, I think the big thing for me is like the not being able to choose. Oh, you're just confused. That was a big stereotype for me. And the older I get now, I'm like, no, I'm not confused. I wasn't confused. I've always had an attraction to both men and women. It's about who I want to partner with. It's a different story of like how I navigate partnerships. But I would even fall on the spectrum of like pansexual because it's more about the person for me. But that was a struggle of having this identity and the stereotype of not knowing who I was. And I was like, I do know who I am and I do know what I like. You know what I mean? I like both and that should be okay. Yeah. And I think that would be the biggest one. I don't know if bisexuals have a positive one.
I actually heard that bisexuals were the original pansexuals. Is that right?
There we go.
Yes.
Doesn't that sound right?
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Totally. I don't know, like maybe bisexuals is more loving and have the more fluidity and access to connecting with the spirit of somebody rather than just the embodied part. As somebody who does weddings and officiates weddings, and it's something I love to do, I often like play with the stereotypes when I'm working with couples, particularly straight couples. And I'm just like, okay, I do need to approve your dress. If you're going to work with me, I'd like to also check out the set list so that the music that you're choosing. But and all kidding aside, I think because I bring a particular aesthetic to ritual, and I bring a particular aesthetic to like a cohesion so that things fit and flow, really feel like that they come from that place of the positive getting. I think it's even more than style. I think it's just an inner awareness of what flows together. And then I also like that I may be able to offer straight couples different ways of engaging in partnership because of how since things tend to break down on gender so much, rather than on skill or rather than on talent or time, or there are lots of other metrics that I think that LGBT folks are so naturally gifted at understanding different ways to make things work. I also feel like this idea that we have chosen family is really important, and that most people who have experienced some kind of trauma with their family of origin could really benefit from having a family of choice and really seeing it as valid and as meaningful. So I don't know if those are stereo, but I think they dance around some of it. Yeah. And I think our over-sexualization, let's just like dive in there, like all the way around. The bisexuals want more sex.
Let's dive in.
Yeah. Bisexuals want more sex. The gays want to have sex all the time. Yeah.
Sometimes I felt like I had to wrestle with sometimes as a religious leader, do I have to limit my choices? What's the expectation? I like put two really different categories, like peanut butter and chocolate together. I think it created something beautiful, delicious, hopefully. But ultimately, I want to be somebody who is sex positive and really encourage people making choices that are about dignity, about pleasure, that pleasure can be part of the conversation, or it's not just procreation, and that isn't forbidden. All of that feels really important. And I do think that sometimes the over-sexualization in our community limits us from having other kinds of pleasure.
Yeah.
Or other kinds of profound connections with people. And that can get in the way. But when we look at the entirety of the world and the negativity that gets brought around sex, that we have something to offer to be able to open up people to their own sensual sexual beings.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And sex is about pleasure, and it shouldn't be tied to just being in a relationship, because it's part of exploring who you are and exploring your body. And for me, it's like the difference between having sex with a woman versus a man is a completely different experience. Like, to me, women is more sensual. It's more heart connected. And not that it's not with men, but that it takes a little bit longer for me. And just like the exploration of being able to have sex in two different types of ways is like really fun. And it's based around just like physical attraction, but also this like emotional connection of wanting to go deeper with somebody in this way that's like, I don't know, deep and intimate.
And for folks who are listening, if you don't know Teneia, she's an amazing musician. And when she comes out on stage, she is sensuality embodied.
That's so true. Yeah.
But there is a way that you weave people through that potent connection of being seen and playful. And it's such a joy to watch. And I think hearing you talk about your approach around sexuality, it's because you're really comfortable in your body and you're comfortable with who you are, and you're not saying to the crowd, I want to have sex with, oh wait, maybe you want, no, you're not saying to the crowd.
I said that last night, yeah.
Right.
You did, I heard you. No, just kidding.
But you're able to channel that, and then it gives people permission to tap into that within themselves, I think.
Yeah. And that's part of like my stage show is being in my body and like really owning that part of me that's sexual, because I feel like that's where creativity comes from anyway. So I think that's why I feel sexually fluid. And that's why most creatives are that way, is because they're able to tap into like their sacral chakra and these chakras that create all this creativity and be like, oh, like a part of, this is a little TMI, but like a part of my creativity is tied to sex and tied to like how I want to explore my own body. And I can tell a disconnect if I'm not like sexually active versus like my creativity. There's this, I don't know the science around that, but I really truly believe that is a part of who we are because we're in our bodies. And so I don't steer away from that. I think it's a thing that I have embraced for a long time. And I love how it shows up. It doesn't have to be overt. It can just be dominating. Somebody said that to me. I was a dom.
That's hot.
I know. And I'm like, I like that. I like that my stage show brings out that part in people.
I think I actually said that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Actually, there was a woman in the group last night because you had us all in a circle doing a serpentine. Like all of a sudden, like we connected as an entire group. And this woman was like, you just dommed us. Because we wouldn't have done that without your suggestion. And you didn't tell us to, you told us to hold hands. And then all of a sudden we became a writhing circle of people dancing and holding hands as we intertwined. So that was because of you, Teneia.
Thank you. Channel that sexual energy somewhere.
Your dom side. I'm not sure if this question will work, but tell me you're in the queer community without telling me you're in the queer community.
Crocs.
I was going to go with shoes too. Doc Martens. I have my Doc Marten boots and I have my leather protest jacket.
Teneia, when I first approached you about this topic, you asked whether you were queer enough for it.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, it was interesting because I haven't dated a woman in a long time. And part of me feels inside of the community and outside of it in my identity. And it's hard sometimes to wrap my head around because I think of myself as being judged for not being bisexual enough. You know what I mean? It's, oh, I was bisexual and I'm bisexual. And maybe my earlier years were more implanted in the community in the way of relationships. But it doesn't change my sexual attraction. So that to me is like, I still identify as bisexual. It's a part of who I am. And it's a part of like how I feel physically attracted to people.
I really think that's such an important point because around religious bias and the way that people talk about it, I would say, look, I'm gay. Like I'm not having sex in this moment. And the way that you're relating to me is like that this particular act is a sin. But like my whole other, like when I'm not having sex and there's periods of my life where I didn't have sex for months or, hours. No.
Minutes. Are we having sex right now? Sorry.
No. Is that your hand? No.
It's getting so hot in here.
It is. We really love each other and have a good time. Maybe I should come out now as bisexual. No, it's that because it's an identity. It is a worldview. It is, and I think that's why I even prefer the word queer because it helps inhabit my worldview, which isn't about having sex every moment. It is about what does it mean to use a term that my African-American siblings have taught me, same gender loving. Really appreciate that term because that has opened up it's that I'm same gender loving that opens up a lot of different perspectives that have everything to do with how I navigate the world, even when I'm not in bed with someone.
Exactly. I love that. I love that you shared that because that really just helped me reframe, am I queer enough? And because it's who I am.
Yes.
My attraction has been there since I was younger. So it doesn't change if I'm having sex with somebody or not. Because one can say if I'm not having sex with a guy either, what happens there? It's the whole thing for me about being a part of the community is very important because I'm not straight. Even if I'm partnered with a man, it doesn't really matter. That the identity doesn't change. So thank you for helping with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that just as being responsible people in the world, I often feel like I want to be an advocate for where people are marginalized, even within marginalized communities. And I'm someone who's never had a problem dating bisexual men, where often very gay men get threatened. So if you're bisexual and single, no.
This is our Tinder profile.
No.
Check out my Instagram.
Because they often feel like once they enter into a significant relationship that they're no longer part of the community. I want there to be space where whatever partnership you're in, that you can still identify with the community. But what I also want sometimes is that I don't feel like, and there's lots of things, like I feel like gay men don't always recognize their male privilege. And sometimes I think that what happens when you are bisexual and you're in a straight relationship is that there's some heteronormative privilege where it makes that relationship easier. But I appreciate my bisexual allies who continue to identify And some of that's a self-identification. And in doing so, recognize that they're still fighting for the rights for all of us to be as comfortable in our relationships as they are in that particular relationship in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Even when I was married, I identified as bisexual. And so every Pride I would post. And it was an interesting thing with my ex-husband's family. They would be like, why is she posting about being bisexual? Like, it was a huge thing. And to my ex-husband's credit, he would be like, because that's who she is. My queerness, my bisexuality didn't go away just because I was married and in a monogamous relationship. And I think that's a huge struggle for people to even identify when you're in a relationship that is heterosexual. Like, people would say, okay, now you're straight. And it's, no, that doesn't change anything.
Can I just say one quick point, which is I have always said that I think that there's a big difference between being gay, queer, bisexual. I'm talking about sex, so I'm intentionally leaving out trans in this moment, and being a homosexual. I think homosexuals happen to be men or women who have sex with other male presenting or female presenting people, and that really for them it's just about that act, and there's not an identity piece. And I think that happens sometimes. Like, that may happen in jail, that may happen in the army, that may happen, but it isn't an identity piece. It is just an act where two beings had sex. And so my controversial hot take on this is, stay there. You did a homosexual act. That's fine. Like, we don't necessarily need you in the community. And I'm not talking about someone who's on a developmental process of coming out. I'm really talking about someone who all they do is have sex with that individual. They're not part of the communal feeling. There's not part of the culture. There's not part of the moving our destiny forward. And I think that's what's really important. And that's why I feel like all of the letters are really important together, because we have a common destiny, whether we recognize it or not. And the bisexuals who still are a part of the community, I need them to be bought into this mutual destiny as active in working together for it.
Why does Pride Month still matter?
Why does Black History Month and Women's History Month matter? I think the celebration of the people that came before us is so important. And I think it's good to celebrate how far we've come and to celebrate our uniqueness. And that, to me, what Pride is about. I've always thought of Pride as one of the most celebratory times. Like, going to Pride is where you just see people fully embody, like, and it's like, in the best way, their freak flag fly. Like, it's no longer a part of what society's expectations are for you. It's a part of, like, you owning every aspect of yourself and showcasing that with other people that respect that and want to mirror that back to you in their own individual way. And so Pride Month to me is important because it shows all of us and how we love differently, but how we can show up and be support for each other.
For me, Pride Month is really incredibly important because the whole economic models built around glitter would collapse. No, we need edible, sustainable glitter.
That doesn't turn into microplastics.
Because it's edible. And I'm of two minds when it comes to Pride. I want us to expand our value vocabulary. So I feel like Pride is a really important value, but there is a way where you hit that note, that Pride without a counterbalance does become a community that becomes so self-absorbed that they're not aware of the intersections of liberation, and allows for the more privileged parts of our community to be in the lead sometimes. And so I do think that I'm really curious about LGBT humility alongside LGBT pride, and that they need to be in relationship and dialogue. And what does patience look like? And what does solidarity look like? And begin to expand this. In this moment, we have had a clock turn back, at least in my part of the world, in the southern United States, where an emboldened legislatures with a Supreme Court that is unlikely not only to support or to overturn any of these things, any of these new laws, they are likely going to be confronting whether they can overturn gay marriage, for instance. So we're going backwards. And so we need rallying points. And the news feels so heavy and despairing that we need gay joy. So alongside pride, the other value is I want us to be able to access our joy. What I have learned again from my Black siblings is that, and I feel it in the Jewish community too, is that in the face of suffering, joy is an act of resistance. Joy is a way of saying, we are here, and that no matter what you do to us, we can claim the fullest sense of what it means to be a human being. And that is to have fun and pleasure and joy.
I'm curious, Josh, but also Teneia, during the 80s AIDS epidemic, the queer community lost a major part of the would-be now elders to learn from. Being an elder now, I feel like I never had, like growing up there was that missing in my life. Maybe it was because I wasn't quite out, but also because there weren't a lot of my community in that role left.
I'm trying to figure out how vulnerable I want to be, like how much this is going to get me in trouble. And so I think what I will say is, because I'm an elder and I'm a good-looking, well-built elder,
plug.
What that has meant is that because of this missing element, a lot of younger men think that the way that they have to relate is through sex or sexuality. And so when I actually offer something else, support or friendship, or even, I would never put in the words of mentorship, but really I almost feel parental in some kinds of ways. I want the younger generation to know that there are people who really care about their well-being and their safety, and that we actually can have a relationship as two gay men without it actually turning sexual, because I feel like that void has, and I also think that daddies are having a moment for that reason.
Is that, do you label yourself a daddy? I just
Say more.
Yeah, I'm interested now. Dumb.
Daddy.
Daddy Dom.
I don't identify as daddy. I've been silver for a long time. And I would say that in my 20s, and I lived in New Orleans where Teneia lives, I had a nickname where people call me Little Daddy. So I feel like I've always just had this energy. That's part of, and I've always reviled against it. And I do think it's some of the conversation for a different time, but like the internal anti-elder and in my generation, older gay men were tossed aside. And I think there's a little bit of that still happens, or maybe there's a lot of that still happens today. And so I've had that really internally. I used to joke that once you're 30 in the gay community, this was my reality. I think all of the ages have changed. But once you're 30, I felt like I become irrelevant as a gay man. But until you hit 50, you don't really become relevant in the Jewish community. And so I felt like I had these, there was this period of nomad land that was going to have no relevance. It was just a very weird kind of two of my communities really valuing very different kinds of things, where really everybody's value at every stage. And that actually, to me, is the issue. So I don't identify as a daddy, but I can't tell you how many people call me daddy or zaddy, which is actually the...
Oh yeah, I heard
What's
of
that?
zaddy.
What's that?
I think zaddy is just like a hot daddy.
Oh, zaddy.
Yeah,
Zaddy. Zaddy. Let's see those
or
legs.
poppy. Like,
Puppy. Yeah, you need to go to Mexico.
so I've actually just begun to accept that is how I am seen now. And luckily at this moment, it's expressed with positivity. But I want to be able to be somebody who, like, I don't really believe in role models anymore. And that's why I became a rabbi, is I thought I wanted to be a role model. I want to be another good human being that people in our community can count on to help make good, sane choices. Stay safe and alive.
I think I was really fortunate. So even my 18-year-old self going to the clubs every weekend, part of the culture was to hang out on Sundays too and be with older gay men and older gay women. And then when I lived in Arizona, I had a huge gay community there, and same when I lived in Louisville, Kentucky. So I've always had people that I could go to that were older than me that could teach me things that I was struggling with, like with my partner or anything, or my parents. And so I think community, the best thing about being LGBTQ plus is the community and having people there that were elders. And it's like funny to me to be 40 and think of myself as an elder to a person.
Hey, mama.
Hey, girl. Hey. But a part of that is just showing up authentically and just being support for people, the younger generation. And it could look like just having lunch. It could have having a conversation. I've been privileged to have friends come out to me, and that put me in a role that felt like a good support, where it's like I'd been a part of the culture longer than they had because they were so scared to even tap in, go to a gay club or anything. And so I constantly come back to this thing of we're all kind of playing these roles, and we're just rotating at different times. And for me, it's an honor to always just be in that role, to have the experience and the wisdom to be able to support somebody through coming out or getting into a relationship, getting out of a relationship and having to explain the gender of the person. I understand that really well. So yeah, I feel like I've been privileged in that way.
Are there any conversations that we should be having?
I think sex positivity is honestly one within our community, just like Josh was saying, because everybody has their different levels of what they want, sex drive and everything else. But just to be able to have sexual experiences without feeling like it's a disservice or feeling like you're going to be judged for those is freaking huge, because we all need to be in our bodies more, and how we show up in that way is so very important to how we grow as humans, because it's a part of intimacy in general. And so when people shy away from having sexual experiences, and then they are left with being later in life and being like, I don't really truly know what I like. And so I'm a huge advocate of sex. Of course, if I'm bringing the sex to the stage, I'm bringing it to all aspects of my life. And I think that is really important. So I think that's a conversation. I know we have it in different ways, but I would say for people that identify as women, I think there's a huge barrier there about being in your bodies and being okay with being sexual, and not shying away from that is important.
Oh, exclamation point. What Teneia said. But for me, the conversation is, we are at a moment in our country, and I believe we've always been there, but it is so obvious that we need to be part of an interdependent movement of people who are fighting for civil and human rights. Mm-hmm. And so I think that sometimes our community can be so micro-focused on our own issues, and that we don't begin to examine the kinds of barriers that we put up that do not allow us to show up as really strong allies, or we don't know when we can begin to put our issues aside, like somehow we feel threatened. One of the things that I've learned a long time ago is that anytime I show up for racial equity, I am fighting homophobia and anti-Semitism without opening my mouth. People know who I am. I don't have to say anything. And by being a good ally and accompanying people, there's so much transformation that happens. And I wish that our community would be able to see that we need to be working on immigration. We need to be working on racial equity. We need to be advancing women's equity in the world, that we need to be part of the community in the conversation around disability rights. For two reasons. One is what I just said, is that there are forces that really are about enshrining power in dominant culture, that we need to be able to band together and say, this is a huge, glorious pie that we can all take part in. But the other part is that we are a community that transcends so many identities. We have people with disabilities in our community. How can we not be advocating for greater access and greater inclusion of people with disabilities? We are all races. We are all religions. We are all, we encompass all of these communities. And so by working together, we're making our community much more enriched. And it's to our detriment that we get micro-focused, I believe, by thinking that our rights are somehow different than others. There's some nuances, of course, but that we really need to be advancing together.
I'm curious how you think queer culture impacts our world. In what ways?
I think it makes people more authentic, because you can't hide who you are for so long and not have repercussions. And so when people come out and they're authentic selves, I think it makes other people, whether they're straight or gay or it doesn't matter, it's like it makes other people reflect on themselves and say, how can I be more authentic? And so I think queer culture has made people think outside of the box in ways, even when it comes to fashion of what to wear. You can see straight men now wearing more colorful things and being more encouraged to show a different part of themselves.
And painting the nails.
Painting the nails. Yeah. Like in one of our groups, Ty was saying like, I like this pink shirt. Like I want to wear that, even though people think it's not hyper masculine. And I think that's how queer culture has like affected people. That's dope. I want to do that and not have to hide behind these gray, mundane kind of things of, oh, this is one tone of who you are.
One of the things that I've said working alongside transgender rights activists is that gender liberation benefits all people. And some of what we're talking about in terms of authenticity, but I just think that our relationship to ourselves and the ways that we fit into the boxes that kind of get holed up and the ways that we don't, all human beings have that. And if you fit in the box now, trust me, you're not going to fit in the box in 5 years, right? And so a greater sense of self-acceptance that allows for that authenticity, but also just recognizing that the work that we're doing creates freedom for all people. It just simply does. Serving in a congregation where LGBT people started welcoming straight folks, like I got to see how we had this prayer called the Prayer for the End of Hiding. And while the prayer was as gay and lesbian Jews, and then it became as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender Jews, we are aware of the loss of integrity that we suffered due to the pressures of the mainstream society. And so straight people started saying this prayer, taking on the identity of LGBT. And so they were able to have this moment to speak. And part of what opened up for people is that everybody has a coming out story. Everybody is in the closet in some way, whether that's about an addiction, whether that's about a childhood trauma, whether that's about a hidden disability. And so I even think that the metaphor of the closet and what does it mean to traverse that and listen to one's own self create something that is really powerful for all humanity.
I feel like a great way to gauge a community is the vibrancy of their queer culture. That's always been like a trusty navigation point for me.
But it expands the limits. I mean, I feel like queer culture like pushes at the boundaries. And so it creates room for more things.
Beautiful things.
Beautiful things.
Beautiful things.
We have this challenge emerging with trans rights, and I want to add voice to our trans brothers and sisters. How's all this turmoil sitting with you?
And I'm just going to say that even how we like language, because we're so used to saying things like brothers and sisters, and already that's gendered. So like our transgendered family, our transgendered siblings. No, and I'm not calling you out. Like it's such an easy thing. These are things that are ingrained in our society. It's what we do. And to be able to lovingly invite all of us to break these paradigms that have been driven into us since we were, it's just really important.
Yeah, for me as an artist, like a big thing that I did, I think it was last year, is I collaborated with a trans artist that's a hip hop artist, but also a singer for the U.S. State Department. And I created a pride piece for them. That was a music video and a song, and it went and made a massive impact. And to me, to use art to tell stories and to put people in the forefront, especially with the U.S. State Department that wouldn't have had a voice there. I think that's where I see my activism show up, is through the art and bringing other artists in to tell their own story and be a representation that maybe people weren't expecting, and to stand beside them in the way of how can I support? How can I support you as an artist, but also how can I support you as a friend? And I think that's, to me, where you can shift minds a lot of the time is through art and engaging in that, and for people to have deeper conversations around what the art made them feel, and then to know the other layers of what the person's story is and what they went through opens and expands their point of view.
I feel like that the conservative political powers are really always are finding these wedge issues, and how can they polarize and embolden a particular base to be able to come out And what often happens alongside legislation is increased violence. And one of the things that we know, studies have been done clearly, is that the trans community receives the most amount of violence, and particularly trans folks of color. And there's so many systemic things that play into those factors in terms of being able to job health, healthcare, all of these things that become so much more complicated for the transgender community, that I feel like it is our responsibility to be better guardians and better protectors. And now they're coming for kids. And so our kids, so much of this legislation is like being talked about in terms of the extremes and not getting the family's understanding and input about what is really happening. Why are medications being used? Which medications? All of a sudden there's this like fantasies about mass surgeries happening on children. That's really not what's happening. But trans children, and then certainly trans adults, need access to quality healthcare and sometimes need particular medication for their process. And this is coming out of a completely uninformed, and most of us are uninformed with exactly what's happening who are engaged in the conversation. And so I think we could be better educated. I think that we can protect our kids, understanding that this conversation is largely happening in sports and it's impacting like a small percentage of like world-class athletes, and then what's happening in the bathrooms, in the restrooms, and this kind of fake sexualization of what's happening with our kids. And these things are really on the poles of society, but it's creating a climate that diminishes the dignity of trans folks throughout the entire system. And so I feel particularly at Pride that we need to be centering trans experiences, and we need to be a better community standing aside them.
Do you have any advice for your younger self?
Have more fun. Do all the things.
Yeah. In many ways, I think I became a rabbi way too soon. Like, I'm doing funerals in my 20s. My first funeral was for somebody who died of AIDS. And I just think that when my friends in their 20s are going to weddings and we're talking about having kids, like, here I am officiating a funeral for a man who died of AIDS, whose family wanted to hide it. I had a lot of sadness and a lot of mourning and a lot of grief in my younger years. And I also, maybe we would all tell our younger selves, like, don't take things so seriously. It doesn't matter what people think of you. And I would want my younger self to know that he was better looking than he thought he was. We have a hard community around our physicality. And I think I didn't fit into some boxes as a short Jewish kid. And I look back at those pictures like, that was me. And so I just wish I had taken it a lot easier and to always be hopeful. That being queer is great. It didn't have to be such a struggle.
It is great.
Yeah. I feel the same. I'll add to that a little bit, like about being bisexual. If there's one thing I would tell my younger self around that, it's okay. You're not weird. You don't have to choose. You can have sex with who you want to, and you can be in relationships with who you want to. And that doesn't define if, that you're not confused, you're not anything. And there are more people like you than you think.
What brings you hope?
I'm so hopeful with this next generation because I think they're so much more open-minded than how I grew up, and they have so much more opportunity. So that brings me hope that this younger generation is pushing us forward in a way that my generation didn't get to. I know we did our part, right? But that's what's bringing me hope right now.
I think that the fact that I'm still alive, I think that I thought that I would be dead at 30 just because I was seeing so many other people die. And I also just felt like life wasn't going to be worthwhile. And so to know that, like, I have a great life and things are unfolding, and the humility of not like determining what there was an arrogance and life is going to suck at whatever age. And so it's really hopeful to have the stance of life is this unfolding mystery. And it's not that everything has been great. It's gone through a really traumatic breakup, and I'm still resilient. A lot of what I've learned has come into play. So that's one piece. And the other piece is that people can change, that there is transformation, there is redemption, that when you don't give up on relationship and you don't give up on people, that there is a way where their hearts and minds can be changed. Gandhi once said, at the end of the day, it's not laws that change people, it's the conversion of hearts. And I really want to be in the business of touching people's hearts and helping them see the humanity of our community.
I'm Tate Chamberlin. This is the Hatch Podcast. Teneia, Joshua, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. This was so fun.
Yeah.
How do we change a heart that clings to hatred? This question isn't new, and it reaches far beyond the queer community and its ongoing fight for acceptance. In fact, the struggle to change hate-filled hearts might even be more foundational to this country than the Constitution itself. At this moment in our nation's history, it feels especially urgent. So how do we navigate this challenge? Hate is deeply intertwined with fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the other, fear of change, fear of loss, and fear of feeling inadequate. By extension, overcoming this fear through education and understanding might just be the antidote to this toxic cycle. But education requires an openness to learn and a willingness to admit what we don't know. It also needs teachers who can approach fear with compassion, holding space for those feelings while guiding the way forward. This process asks for mutual respect, patience, and kindness. It calls for a love of humanity in all its forms and flaws to lead the way. It's no small feat for either side, but often the only way out of the fire is to walk through it together. And there is hope, too, in this baptism by fire. The next generation seems ready to spark a social and political transformation like we've never seen before. As the dry remnants of the past burn away, they're creating fertile ground for something new to grow. Young saplings rising from the ashes, emerging from the shadows of the canopy's shade to reach for the sun. The same, but different. So let's hold on to that hope. Let's commit to learning, to understanding, and to loving one another fiercely.
It seems now more than ever that we have found ourselves on the cusp of monumental worldwide change. Whether we consider the environment, politics, infrastructure, health, economics, or inequities across a broad swath of social constructs, the consensus is clear and urgent. All is not as it should be. The United Nations, a consortium of 193 member states from around the globe, agrees. In 2015, the UN unanimously adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. These goals call for urgent action and global partnership to secure peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future.
In alignment with the SDGs, Hatch, a curated network of artists, activists, and entrepreneurs working together to accelerate positive global change, has partnered with I Am Interchange to fuse adventure journalism with experiential design labs to develop innovative solutions to complex global challenges. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the podcast. If you enjoy it, please subscribe or leave us a rating. This episode was produced by Yara Craner, Susan Karstensen, and me, Tate Chamberlin. A shout out to our media and production team, Jessica Byerly, Darko Sevilla, Jacob Desch, Sean Mackinson, Amin Yarsu, and Zane Giordano. A special thanks to Yara Craner, Jared Silverman, Pete Strom, Eitan Shapira, Rachel Hicks, Roshi Gavechi, Anya Bulis, Teneia Sanders, Erica Mackey, Raymond Unsodagi, Mark Gerner, Elke Govertson, Ignacio Packer, Kyle McGrew, Eskil Björkestrand, Joshua Lesser, and the rest of the Hatch team and crew from Co-Palace for hosting me. Thank you. With so much gratitude to the Hatch supporters, Steelcase, the Kauffman Foundation, the Gwydion Fund, Envision Equality, the Hatch Volunteers, Board of Directors, Hatch Guardians, and the community who help make this work and mission possible. To learn more about Hatch, visit hatchexperience.org. Building community could not happen without food. And with that, I'd like to thank Whistlepig Korean, Red Tractor Pizza, and Zocalo Coffee House. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? Shoot me an email at tate@iaminterchange.org. That's tate@iaminterchange.org. Remember, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.